Okay, so we're going to continue our journey through learning how to relate to multiple tables. And in this case, we're going to now add to our tool belt the idea of joins, where we have been using subqueries. And subqueries are good to learn, and there's a place and a time for them. But I thought I would start today by asking chat about this. Like, what's the benefit of using joins versus subqueries? And both have their use cases, which I wasn't surprised about. But join, and I knew this was preferred for performance and for readability. So then it just talks about how much faster it is, and readability may be a question in your head after you see them, but after you write more of them, it starts to make more sense. Okay, so what we're going to do here, and just to remind ourselves, we're still going to be working on that same query I had you do before. Matter of fact, I already have my code space open. I have the last queries that we wrote. I have my bash running. I have my SQLite. I was playing around, so I'll do shell clear here. So I have it. I do know my box is running, so I'm good to go there. So let's remind ourselves. Let's go look at our DS, our data set, right? So our data set text file, which is, in this case, the output of all the tables that are in this long list, right? And so in this case, we know that there's a relationship between, right, the authors, authored, and books. And the way we know this is by these foreign keys, but I think it helps to look at it visually first, right? Because here's our ERD, our entity relationship diagram. And this to me is much easier to kind of like just see. It's visually more it's for us humans, this is easier for us generally. So we know authors write books. We know books are written by authors. We therefore can say that authors and books have a many-to-many relationship. They may not. They may have one book written by one author, but it could be based on the different types of data. And then in this case, the relationship is built such that it allows many to many. And when we have these many to many relationships between our entities, because this is an entity and this is an entity, we therefore need a joiner table. And this joiner table, I'm going to go back here, right, is our authored. And in this case, the foreign keys tell us this, right, that our author ID that's here is actually is connected to the way the relationship is handled is it references the ID over in authors. And then on the book ID, that references the book ID, the ID over in books. Okay, so where we have in here a book ID. So these two values are foreign. Now, another way to look at this, and I think to me the more helpful way, is also to actually just look at the data. The data itself shows you this. Here's my authors table. Here's my books table. We did this last week, so if you want to go back and look, right? So here's the queries, the 3 queries we wrote, just to show us the data. But when looking at the data, that we can see this authored table, again, it's specified here by wrote, but we know from the data perspective it's actually called authored, and it connects the authors to the books. Okay, and how does it do it? It does it by saying this author, author 23, wrote book one, ID 1. So this and this is how these tables connect. Okay, and it's how we join them. And I don't mean connected in that sense, but it's how they relate, right? So again, think of relationships. We relate them this way, okay? So it's really, to me, this helps me so much when I'm writing queries. All these other things are good, and the more you start to understand them, right, and as you build, as we start writing them, these will start to make more sense. But right now, I think where we're at is this, I think, could be helpful combined with this entity relationship diagram. Okay, So let's go back over here. And now, and by the way, most of you probably will have your file looking like this because that's the last query we wrote. And by the way, that is the way when I'm looking at your work, I can kind of see students are actually tracking along with this with me because it's generally the last query you wrote. Okay, so I'm going to control / to comment that out. I do see that my SQLite is my proof of work, which I'm going to need, is ready to go. I don't need to change anything. I do have another terminal session over here. And so we're going to start here. I already have mine up, and I'm just going to, and by the way, before I ever start writing queries, I always do tables or schema to make sure my database reference is correct. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take just the print real quick, and I'm going to get, and you should, from here on out, you should always at least have one print statement in your SQL file. I know that our README files are used for notes or proof of work, but in this case, and I want you to have this as refactor to join. Refactor, because okay, if you've never heard the term refactor, it's basically taking what we've done, not basically, it's taking the way we've written it here, and we're going to create the same output, but we're going to refactor it. We're actually, and generally refactors are done to make things more efficient, right? And let's say to implement join. Okay, so let's have that as our description here. So we know, and in this case, because we can look at this subquery, we know, based on our conversation we already had, but just looking at the way the subquery is written, we're going to have to join 3 tables, okay? And so what I'm going to have you do is actually start, we're going to write this one kind of line at a time. I'm going to show you output. And this is something I noticed Carter doesn't necessarily do. He writes the whole thing, which is fine, but I find it helpful, and this is just me. You can tell me. Matter of fact, that could be one of the things I may have you do, but is it helpful to see? Okay, so we're just going to start here. So we're going to select, okay, star from authors, okay? Right, so this is our first query that says, okay, we're starting from authors, right? And in this case, right, we're actually going to go ahead and add this to our proof of work because we know, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to just make sure it runs, by the way. Yep, it runs fine. That looks right. Okay. We could do a count on it, but that looks right. So then I would come over to here and I've already got this on. I think I already had it. Good. So then that should be added to. Now, there we go. So now I have some new entries in my proof of work, right? So now I know I have all my authors. So now you're going to, for the first time, and by the way, anytime, right, before I write my next line, I'm going to get rid of that semicolon because when you're running it, right, because it's the semicolon tells us to stop here, and we're not stopping yet. So now we're going to do join. So what are we going to join? We're going to join authored. Okay, so and think about this. We're joining author. We're joining these 2 tables on something. We actually have to tell it how we're joining them. Again, if we looked back, right, on this data itself, we're joining them. We're joining authored, right, by author ID. Okay, that's how, because it's equal to the ID here. So that's how we write it. So now we're saying authored. Now what are we joining it on? We're joining it on authored. And now this is where a little new syntax. And if you've been in programming, you've seen this kind of dot syntax. It's basically saying, here's your table. Now, here's your column within that table. This dot syntax will be used if you continue on with coding because it's very important. So now the question is, what column in the authored? We just looked at it, right? So if we want to go back in the authored, right, it's the author ID. Okay, so we're joining that. So we're saying join authored. Sorry, my bad. It's author ID. Author. And in this case, it's a underscore ID. Okay, again, my author ID right there is joined with what? in this case, we're going to join these two, right? We're joining these two first. Okay, so let's do that. Right, so now we have to say, what is it going to be equal to? Well, in this case, it's equal to authors dot ID. And I'm going to put a semicolon there. Now, why am I going to do that? Because I'm actually going to run this query to show you the output, right? So you can see it. So let's take this and see. Let's see if I wrote it right first. Let's come back over to my SQLite. I'm going to do shell clear. Now, I do have my resolution set a little higher so we can see it. Let's see if I have it. And good. So now, check this out. So now we have joined together these two tables, and now we see it in the output. We see the author ID and we see the book ID. So for me, that helps, right? So now, by the way, let's do this, right? Let's do this, up arrow, boom. I have it now in my proof of work, okay? So I'm going to get rid of this. So now what do we now need to join? So now that we have that, so we need to do another join. So what do we need to join now? We need to join books on, and let's go look, right? So now that we've joined this and this, now we need to bring in this table. And so we're going to join, right, book ID, right? So book ID with authored book underscore ID. Okay, that's how they relate. Okay, so that's how we write it. So we're going to say books dot what? Its ID is equal to. Okay, so what are we joining on? Right, we're joining on authored what? Book. In this case, underscore ID. Okay, let's just look at that for a minute. So we're joining in books now. Okay, so we're bringing in the books. With the books, we have a books ID right here. Okay, and then we have a authored book. Is it books or booked? Book ID. Okay, so now our table, let's go back here, our output resulting table. Okay, so let's go run our query. Right, so now I'm going to copy this. Oh, yeah, right? So now I can see it. So now I have all three tables outputting. And so I can see now I have the titles because I'm bringing in all the book data. So again, this is a data result table with all the columns that we've brought together in one results table. But we're not done yet, right? And by the way, we need to go over here, right? Cool, added that, so we're good to go. So now, what else do we need to do? Well, we need to do the last piece, right? The last piece is where title equal to whale. Okay, so now that we have all the results, now we want to say we want a specific book. Whale, we want the author. So traverse, and find us. Give us only that particular one. So now I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to come back to my SQLite, and there it is. And look at all of these. Right? This is all the columns of these three tables brought together. Okay? All right, so let's actually go and do this, where we go here. Now we have all of that. I could go look at my files and go see if that last one, yep, it's in there. Okay? That's cool. Now, I could have actually done each statement as a print. I could have done that. That would have been nicer, but I didn't. Okay, now, in your README file, because now that we have this, add a in your README file, right? So this is actually going to be part 2. You'll have this. You'll add to your notes. Don't worry about putting it now. But right now, have week 7 attendance. And I want to see if you can answer this question, right? How can we just output book title and author's name for this query? Because it's nice to be able to see, right, that whole long output, right? I mean, all the data brought together. But let's say we only want to see the author's name and the title. What would you do? So again, I want you to pause right here, and in your README file, tell me what you would do. And you can attempt the query if you want, but what I want you to do is do that and then commit with my answer. Okay, that's your commit message. Right? Now, it's not that it's right or wrong. It's like your attempt to think about how would you do it, right? I'll show you how I'm going to do it. So pause here, right? Give it your answer. Commit your mess. And by the way, if you're new to this, and even if you shouldn't have the answer off the top of your head. This is not necessarily an easy answer. Because in this case, if I'm selecting star from authors, it probably would make sense, right? I could do name here, right? Let's just see. Let's just see if that actually does make sense. I'm going to copy this. It does make sense, right? But when I am selecting from authors and I want title, it's not in authors, right? But because we've written this query in this join way, we can just do this. Okay? But I'm going to show you even a clearer way, but let's just go ahead. And we didn't do proof of work on that one, right? So this, when you just build this query, if you haven't done it before, because generally when we select column, it's only from the table we're looking at, but because this query is written such that it joins all these together, you can do it by saying, whatever is in my resulting table, I can bring in. But to be most clear, what you'd probably do here, okay, there's a couple of ways, and actually I would almost do it here as well. Name maybe not, but title, books, dot, title. And then down here, right, also I'd probably put books, dot, title. Let me just make sure that runs. It should. But in this case, it more explicitly, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you this now, is that you can get in a situation where join queries won't run because the multiple tables may have the same column name. So let's see. Good. That still worked, but it's clear. And if the most clear, now this one doesn't quite make sense because we're saying from. And I think it should still work, so this might be our last one here. Oh yeah, actually it's authors. Let's see. I think I messed it up. Okay, let's see if I did, because you should be able to do that, just in the should sense. Cool. All right. All right. So now let's go ahead, go over to here, pop this out. Now this actually does show the duplicate, because we wrote it, right? Okay, so that's your code along for this, and then I will set now and think about what I want you to write about here, and then I'll have that and possibly a short video otherwise. But go ahead and commit. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and go back to the README file, and after you've done this, you do another commit message, and this one will be code along join done. Okay, all right, so pick it up after.